if you need things to be a certain way, then you're being held hostage by the situation. It's actually what's that quote? It's something like the oak tree fought against the storm and broke, but the willow tree bent and survived. And it's like you
Hmm.
need some amount of, flexibility and adaptability.
So I have this habit that I do every year, which is I try to pick like a word that I want to use as my sort of like not mantra for the year, but a word that I want to influence all the decisions that I make. So
Sure.
like a couple
A
of years ago
theme
it
for the
was
year.
exactly a couple of years ago it was stillness. This year it was systems. I haven't come up with a good word for 2025. But do you do that, or what do you think of
Hmm.
that as a practice?
I don't do it, but I know many people who do, in some in my personal family who do. Yeah, I think it's a cool practice. I think it's a good idea to give you a. Sometimes I think about, you look at life through. It's almost like you're looking through different windows. It gives you
Hmm.
a different window to view all the opportunities that you have and the challenges that you face for the year. And that's kind of nice to have a little bit of a different frame to run things through. Maybe it, reveals something. So,
Yeah,
a
it
lot of
gives you
people.
like a value to check your decisions against.
Yeah. People talk about the law of attraction, it's like you
Hmm.
want more money, think about money, you want more whatever. But I think actually we should call it the law of attention, because all it really is when you start thinking about something, once you start paying attention to it, you naturally notice opportunities for it and areas where it pops up. And this is like that. You pick stillness and you start seeing areas where, that can apply in life. You pick, like one thing I'm thinking a lot about recently is like leverage, or how do I get more out of each unit of time, or how do I get more out of
Yes.
each unit of effort. And when you have that frame, it gives you a different way of thinking about that, seeing the things that you face each day. So yeah, I like it.
That's a great word. I might actually steal that, leverage, because sometimes you're thinking about like, yeah, for me it would be how can I get more out of what I'm already doing, as opposed to just trying to do more and more. That one year the word was less, but I think leverage is actually a more positive way of expressing that same idea.
Right. I don't do the theme thing or the word thing for each year, but if I did, that probably would have been my word for this year. And
Yeah.
my little shorthand for it is fewer moves but bolder strokes. So like
Mm.
how can I exert how can I get the same outcome in fewer moves, or how can I get perform the same type of moves rather than working harder but get a better output from them. So yeah, it's not always possible, but if you approach life with that lens, then you start to notice areas where it can turn out to be a reality.
Well, I think that's very common is we say we want certain things or we want our life to be a certain way, but then if we look at our individual choices, they're often not in accordance with getting closer to that. They often take us further away. So people say stuff like, family is the most important thing, but if you
Hmm.
actually looked at their day-to-day choices, they're valuing many things over family. Now, some of that is just a reality of life. You have to do it, but we want certain outcomes, or we say we're adhering to certain strategies, but then we're making tactical decisions that are not in alignment with that priority or that strategy at all.
It's really natural. One of the questions I try to ask myself a lot is, what do I approach it in different ways, but you could say one version of the question is, what am I optimizing for? So
Mhm.
sometimes you optimize for free time or time with family. Sometimes it's for making money. Sometimes it's for creative freedom. But the answer changes for not just across people. It will change within you. Like I'm optimizing for different things now than I was 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
Sure.
So that question I find helpful. Another question is, what season am I in right now? Sometimes you're in a season where the work burner is cranked on high and you're really focused on, performing well there. Other times the friends or family burner is cranked up. But when your season changes, your emphasis or your habits often need to change. What value you're emphasizing is going to shift. And then the last way that I think about it is, what basically the question is, what do I want my daily lifestyle to look like, not what
Yeah.
do I want my results to look like. Because
Yeah.
if you do it based on results, or you do it based on the opportunities that come your way, that's when it's really easy to get into talking yourself into, oh, let me do this because it's a cool thing. But if you do it based on what you want your daily lifestyle to look like, and then you say, I'm going to draw a box around what I want my day to look like, and inside of that box, how can I make the most money, reach the most people, make the biggest impact, and so on. But not if it's outside of it. But most people start the other way around, which is they say, how can I make the most money or reach the most people or make the biggest impact or, get the result that I want. And then they kind of draw the box around that and convince themselves, oh, I would be okay with living that lifestyle. And what you end up with is talking yourself into a lifestyle that you don't actually enjoy that much just because you were chasing the outcome.
Or you've told yourself that your day-to-day life now is not what you want, but it's so you can get to a point where in the future you will have that day-to-day life, and it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't tend to work out that way. So people will set up a day-to-day life for the bulk of their existence that they don't enjoy, that doesn't prioritize the things they want, so that yes, someday when they can retire, they can move to the place they want to live, or organize their day around the things they want to. Now, of course, life is about delayed gratification, but there is something about sort of presuming a tomorrow or a golden years or whatever that I think the Stoics would say is a tad arrogant. There's the humility of delayed gratification, and then there's also the arrogance of, oh, I can get to that later, or
Mm-hmm.
someday I'll be able to.
Your last point is a good one. Delayed gratification is a big part of life. And I think, what is it that allows people to strike this balance well and gracefully? And what is it that, kind of prevents people from doing it? I think a lot of it is patience and persistence. Most people, so if we kind of layer on the things we're talking about here, so you have a certain kind of lifestyle that you'd like to live day to day, but you also make these promises to yourself and you realize delayed gratification and investing in the long term is a big part of life. And that's how we do get better results. And life is easier when you get better results. And then what we were talking about a minute ago with leverage, how do I get more output from each unit of time I'm putting in? Or how do I get more out of less? Um, if you kind of start to layer all those things together, what you realize is there aren't actually that many things in life that allow you to check all those boxes, that allow you to
Yeah.
both have a good daily life and generate the long-term returns that you want and get a great output from the effort that you're putting in. And so I think a lot of people just get impatient with the answers. They don't come up with a good answer for it right away because there aren't that many things that can do all that. And so then they kind of give up and they settle for something less. And I
Yeah.
think one of the lessons is reflection and review is a really critical part of living a good life. You need to carve out a lot of time to think about what type of day do I want? What type of lifestyle do I want? What are my opportunities and what's available to me? What resources do I have at hand? And how can I piece these things together and align them with my personal interest in a way that allows me to live a good daily life and also get the long-term rewards that I want? And there probably aren't going to be just like 100 things that pop up as an answer to that question. You're probably going to need to think about it and lean against it. I mean, in a sense, it's something that you never fully get an answer to. It's a process. It's a question that you continue to lean against for your whole life, and you kind of figure out the art of living as you
Yes.
go. But by having the question, just by walking around and carrying that ambitious question in the back of your mind, you go a long way toward getting an answer. And I think a lot of people give up on it too soon, and that's why they end up with substandard answers and kind of have to settle for something less.
I have a little quote that I have framed in my office. It's from Seneca. He says, too many people lack the fickleness to live as they should and instead simply live as they have begun. So I think
Mm,
one of the things that happens is a set of assumptions or a path made sense at a time, or a setup or an arrangement made sense at a time where we just didn't have anything better. And so we start doing a thing and then we lack that sort of fickleness is an interesting word because we see it mostly as a negative word, but we lack the ability to tweak and to change and to experiment to try to potentially find something better. So we just keep going down the path that we always went. We were choosing majors in college and one
mm,
seemed slightly more interesting than another. And then 40 years later, we're still lawyers, even though we don't actually like this thing anymore. And we didn't even know that much about it when we decided to go to law school or whatever. Insert any path that you can take in your life for law school and being a lawyer there. But this idea of like, I moved here because it made sense at the time does not mean you have to continue out your days that way. Or you're a person who wakes up early, maybe you're actually a night owl, or your business keeps you up late, and so you don't know that actually you're a morning person. But this willingness to tweak and experiment and try different ways of doing things, that's how you ultimately do get to that day-to-day satisfaction that we're talking about.
Yeah, Seneca says fickleness, but maybe in modern language we would say like adaptability or being
Yeah.
flexible. You know,
Hmm.
it's you don't have this rigid way of living life. Like if you need things to be a certain way, then you're being held hostage by the situation. You know, it's actually the what's that quote? It's something like the oak tree fought against the storm and broke, but the willow tree bent and survived. And it's like you
Hmm.
need some amount of, you know, flexibility and adaptability. It's actually the flexible and supple things in life that survive, and it's the rigid and fixed things that break and are brittle. And so I think there's that line by Lao Tzu where he says like the way of the living is to bend and to adjust, and the way of the dead is to, you know, be brittle and rigid. Um, and so there's a lot of that. Sometimes we talk about consistency as like this rigidness, you know, this discipline. Oh, to
Yeah.
be consistent, it means to be the type of person who always grits through it, always makes it happen, no matter the conditions of the situation. But in real life, I think consistency is often adaptability. It's flexibility. It's when you don't have enough time, you do it in the short way or the smaller way. When you don't have enough energy, you do it in the easy way. When you don't have the skills, you figure out a way to do it, you know, in a more beginner style. And so it's the ability to flex and adjust to the circumstances, but not throw up a zero for that day,
Yeah.
to still show up. That is actually what consistency looks like. And of course, we all want to perform, you know, better and to try to do more, but it's actually not letting 0 days creep in. That
Yeah.
is what consistency really looks like.
Yeah. I read about this NFL kicker once who, like, he was anti-ritual. Like, he didn't ever want to be like, these are my lucky socks, this is the way I trot on the field. Like, he was really almost paranoid about not creating patterns, because then you need them to be a certain way. And I
Mm,
think if you're a habit oriented person or a routine oriented person, it can almost become like a sort of a religious thing or a compulsion, where you're like, I have to have it this way. And that's great insofar as you can control your environment day to day. But the reality is you can't. Like, when I talk, I try to think, here's the system or the order of things that I like to do it in to get the best performance. But I also kind of lean into those days where that gets blown apart because the flight is delayed or I'm sick
hmm
or something happened. I go like, this is me getting practice doing it in a different way, so I can feel comfortable knowing that whatever the circumstances are, I can perform, that I'm not so rigid that I'm actually fragile.
hmm There's an interesting story about Josh Waitzkin. You know him, he
Yeah.
did the chess guy and then martial arts and whatever. That he was doing this martial arts competition. It was like the national championships or something. And there was I think he was in Thailand or Taiwan or, you know, somewhere where English was not the primary language, and there was a mix up in the schedule. He thought that he was performing at a later time, and so he was taking a nap on the bleachers. He thought he was competing like 6 hours from then. And they came up and woke him up and they said, "Hey, actually, you're supposed to be on the mat in like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And you need to walk across the stadium or whatever." And so he went from being asleep to needing to compete in this high level competition like right away. And he said earlier in his career, he had this pregame routine, this ritual, like you had mentioned, like a lot of athletes do, where it was like 12 minutes or 10 minutes. And then eventually what he started to do was he started to compress it.
Yeah.
And, you know, in that moment, he didn't have 12 minutes, but he had already practiced compressing it down. Eventually, I think he got it down to something under like 30 seconds. And he could just do that little ritual in, 15 seconds and be ready to compete. And that I like that, that kind of thinking of like, okay, it is nice to have an on switch where you feel
Yeah.
like, okay, I need to be ready to go now, and I need to have some signal to my brain that we're getting started. But the more that you can compress that sequence, the less brittle, as you say, you are. If you need to step on a leaf and walk counterclockwise 3 times and go through some mantra, like you don't have time for that.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's
Especially when you have kids, because your life is just an endless series of your routines being being blown apart. And not only if sort of religiously sticking to those routines, it's not just unrealistic. If you were to somehow manage to do it, it's coming at the expense of someone else, right? You by nature, your comfort and your way of doing things is no longer the priority. So you have to kind of get good at being like, resilience to me is the ability to perform and continue to operate no matter what's happening. And so if you need it to be a certain way, you're not resilient. You're the opposite of resilient.
right. Yeah, the more you are more mentally tough if your mood and your performance is not dependent on your conditions. You know,
Yes.
if you're dependent on favorable conditions, you're actually not that tough. So I don't know. It's a tricky thing, but I think this also comes back to that theme that I've kind of had for the year, which is fewer moves and bolder strokes. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, I don't have time for a lot of moves. You know, it forces you to choose very carefully. If I have limited hours, if I have unfavorable conditions, if I'm not in an ideal situation, I don't have time for 20 moves. I have time for two. And how can I make sure that those are getting me the output that I want?
I was thinking about one of those for this year. I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to come up with one meal, and this is going to be like my go-to meal. I'm not going to eat it every day, but it's going to be if I don't know what to order, if I don't
Mm.
know, if I don't have much time to cook, if there's not much in the fridge, like this is my thing. Like this is my go-to. It's decently healthy. It doesn't
Yep.
take a lot of time. It doesn't have a lot of, and I'm just going to be like, that's my thing. So whatever happens, that's kind of like, I wonder what I talked to Les Snead, the GM of the Rams once, and he said, like, you have to have panic rules. Like, what do you do when coverage
Mm.
gets blown or, something happens? Like, this is going to be like my panic meal. When I don't know what my normal thing is, when I don't
Hmm.
get to decide, I'm just going to hit this button and do that thing.
Yeah. I like the idea of having good defaults. You know,
Yes.
sometimes the way I phrase it is, what do you do when you have nothing to do? So like
Mm,
for a lot of people, when they have nothing to do, when they've got a 10-second break while they're standing in line at the store, or when they, have 5 minutes in between a meeting, what they do is they scroll on their phone. They pull up
yeah.
social media, they look at, whatever. They have a default mode that they go into when they have nothing to do. And what I've really tried to do, I'm still working on this. I definitely don't have this figured out. But what I've tried to do is have a better answer to what do I do when I have nothing to do. And
Mm,
right now, my answer is I have this book that I'm working on. And so when I don't know what to do, when I've got an in between moment between meetings, when I don't have anything that's instantly happening, I open up that doc and I start editing.
yeah.
And so it's just a much better thing for me to do in those in between moments. And you're kind of describing that for food, which is
Yeah.
when I don't know what to eat or when I'm not sure what I'm having for lunch, I'm having this. And
Yes.
it's nice to have a couple good answers to things like that in life, because what happens is you turn around, in 3 months, and if you were just scrolling your phone 47 minutes a day was eaten up on Instagram and you didn't really feel it at all, and it
Yeah.
didn't do anything. And instead, 47 minutes a day is spent editing this document, and all of a sudden the book is finished and you're surprised by how much progress you've made.
Yeah, it's kind of actually it's like it's your version of that word. Like you're like, I work on the book. When I don't know what I'm doing, I work on the book. And
Mm-hmm.
for me it's usually like my note cards. If I don't know what I'm supposed to do, if I somehow have a magical day where I have more time, it's like I have this big stack of books that I have to process that I've read that I have to do my note cards on. And I'm just going to do a couple pages. And if you can kind of have the idea of like you have this big thing that you're chipping away at and it gets your extra time, yeah, that's a good thing because you always know what to do. You know what to do.
Right. Right. Yeah. If you don't know what to do, then you end up choosing whatever's in front of you.
Hmm.
But if you have something that can guide you, then you end up using that time much more effectively.
How do you think about, like, I have habits that I was more consistent with in the past that I've
Mm,
fallen off from for whatever reason? How do you
sure.
think about re-engaging with an old good habit, like
So
picking up where you left off?
it's a good question, and this is something that I don't know if I would say I've changed my thinking as much as I have learned something that I didn't know over time. So um, people don't usually say this explicitly, but in the back of their mind, when people set out to build a habit or they're thinking about being good at their habits, they kind of think, what would it look like to be successful at this? Would mean that I do it every day for the rest of my life. Is kind of that I would not
Sure.
miss it anymore after I started. And in reality, first of all, I don't think that's a good standard for what makes a habit successful. And also, I don't even know that it really is optimal. Instead, what I have been encouraging people to do a lot more recently is, what if you just let your habits change shape based on the season that you're in? And
Mm,
I don't think it means that you abandon the habit, but it does mean that you refine it or you edit it. So, like, let's take my writing habit as an example. I would say that I've had a good writing habit for the last 12 or 13 years. But in some sense, if you're being strict about it, you could say that I broke that habit a couple times. Like, for example, for the first 3 years that I wrote a new article every Monday and Thursday, and they were like 2,000 to 3,000 word pieces. And I did that for 3 years. And then I signed the book deal for Atomic Habits, and I didn't have the capacity to do that and write the book. So I switched to writing the book for the next 3 years. And I still did some writing on my site, but I wasn't really doing it in the same way. And then now the last like 5 years, I've been writing a weekly newsletter, which is much shorter. It's like maybe 500 words at most. But that gets written once a week. And I think it's fine that the writing habit has changed shape over time.
Sure.
It doesn't need to look the same. My exercise habit is a similar story. Like for a while before I had kids, like I was working out, I was training for longer sessions. Maybe it was like 90 minutes, and then, we had a period there when kids are little and you got toddlers, and it was like, listen, the most I can possibly carve out is like 45 minutes at a time. And that's just what it's going to look like. And there are a lot of days when all I had was like 15 or 20 minutes, and I would just go in and do like one set of squats. And, that doesn't look like a full workout, but it's a lot better than doing nothing. And so anyway, I think if you have a habit that served you well and you're sitting there thinking, I would love to reclaim this, I would love to bring this back in my life in some way, I think one of the first questions to ask is, what would it look like if this changed shape a little bit? And what is the right shape for this habit in my current season? And then there's a second question to ask, which is, what would this look like if it was fun? Like what sounds fun to you changes over time, but you'd be surprised. I don't know. I feel like a lot of people choose habits because they think they should have them, or like their peers want them to have them.
They feel guilty that they don't have them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like people are like, oh, I should read more. And it's like, well, that's fine. But like, what would it look like if it was fun for you?
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean every habit in your life is going to be like the most fun thing that you do. It's not always going to feel like going to a concert or something, but pretty much any habit can be more fun than the default. And I think it's worth it to lean your head against that and try to come up. Okay, you want to exercise? Great. Let's brainstorm like 50 different ways that you could live an active life, and then pick the one on that list that sounds the most fun to you. Or like I had one woman who she wanted to start, she felt like she was eating out for lunch too much. She wanted to bring her salad in and, make a salad each day. And she just kind of felt like making a salad sounded a little bit like a chore, and she wasn't quite ready to when she said she wanted to do that, she ended up feeling friction and not doing it. So she asked herself this question of, what would this look like if it was fun? And she started making, I think she called it a party in a bowl. So, in the beginning, she would like sprinkle potato chips on it, or, she would do things that you wouldn't consider healthy, but it made it fun. And then once she had done this for like a month or two, and it was already, it was kind of more established, and she was bringing it in every day. Well, now there's all kinds of ways you can improve the habit. But I think starting with fun and starting with what is the right shape, those are two good ways to reclaim a habit you've lost.
Yeah, my writing habit has evolved similarly. I think originally it had to be discipline, black and white, you do it or you don't do it. And now I feel like I've slowly, steadily lowered the stakes of it. So now it's like, did I make a positive contribution to my writing today? So sometimes that's editing, sometimes it's writing, sometimes it's adding, sometimes it's deleting, sometimes it's a huge contribution, sometimes it's a little contribution. But as long as I'm doing the thing, that's checking the box. The
ball needs to be moving forward.
Yes. I love this magical phrase also that I don't think we say enough in this society, which is more often than not. Like we're all or nothing, or do you do it every day?
Yeah.
Are you the best in the world as opposed to like, more often than not, do you eat healthy? More often than not, did you, not hit the snooze button? More often than not, did you do the thing? And cumulatively, more often than not, if you do something, you're going to end up in a pretty good space. Now, there's some things you don't want in your body. It's not more often than not, I don't do heroin, right? There's some things not at all. Yeah. But I think most things, it's like more often than not, are you bringing your lunch from home as opposed to grabbing fast food? For most people, the switch between what you were doing before and more often than not is going to be significant, if not transformative.
Huge. Most people are not even close to the level of consistency they think they are. Most people are not even doing stuff like half the time that they think they're doing it. So if you are actually doing it more often than not, that's a huge jump in performance. And I would even say for most areas of your life, let's call it 80 to 90% consistency, is probably a better place to live than like 99% consistent. You probably, for most things, you probably don't actually want the lifestyle that would allow you to be 99% consistent. The person who like has not missed a single run in 17 years, it is such a big part of their life that there are lots of other trade-offs that they're making that you probably don't want, actually. It would probably require you to change your life in a really dramatic way to be that consistent with it. But if you do your run 90% of the time, well,
Yeah.
that's probably great. And that still means you got the flex to deal with the rest of life. So I would say that's, for most things, that's probably the right place to live.
Yeah, more often than not, are you more often than not making a positive contribution? Are you more often than not doing the thing, as opposed to I need to become a totally new person, living a totally new life, doing everything in a new way? It's just, and yeah, your point of like, hey, so you consistently did it 99% of the time for 5 years, and then you came to loathe it, and so you stopped doing it, or you quit, or you got burned out. Uh,
Or you were even
Cumulatively,
really good at that thing, but you strained all of your personal relationships in the process. Like
totally.
what's the cost of success? And, there are a few things in life, like literally most of us maybe have one or two things that are worth extreme sacrifice, and everything else can be more often than not.
Yes. Yeah. And if you, I got to think about it with running. It's like, I don't want to miss a day. And then I get hurt because I forced it on a day. And then I
Hmm.
miss more days than I would have had I just taken this one day off. I think about that trade off all the time.
Longevity is its own form of greatness. Stay in so many ways, health and fitness, business, like staying in the game is actually the
Yes.
true long-term achievement. Like to have the business provide for your lifestyle for 40 years, rather than being a flash in the pan for 3 years. That is its own form of greatness. To continue to be able to remain healthy and continue to work out rather than running a peak marathon time 1 year, that is its own form of greatness. And so people got to decide what they want to prioritize. Some people are doing it to be the very best at that thing, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that most of the time and in most ways in your life, staying in the game is a big part of success.
Yeah, and look, most things are not professional sports that have a real expiration date on them that has a ticking clock. Like one of the great things about writing is that a lot of
Yeah.
writers are doing their absolute best work in their 80s or 90s. But if you want to do that, in your chosen field or profession or whatever habit we're talking about, then you got to start thinking as Peter Attia talks about, which is like, okay, backing out from that far away outcome, what are much more sustainable habits, or what's much more long-term thinking that you have to engage in here, because what you're proposing now or how you're behaving now is simply not sustainable.
Most people need consistency more than they need intensity. We talk ourselves into the intensity piece. Oh, I want to do a silent meditation retreat for a week. Oh, I want to run a marathon. Oh, I want to, whatever. But actually, what you want is to become a meditator. Do it for
Yeah.
5 minutes a day for the next year. Forget about the silent meditation retreat. Or like, what you want is not to read 30 books, in a year. What you want is to become a reader. Find a way to
Yeah.
fall in love with it. What's the fun way to do it? How are you, how's reading enjoyable for you? So you're trying to build a lifestyle. You're trying to foster an identity. You're trying to embody the type of person that you want to be with the
Yeah.
behaviors that you're doing each day. And once it becomes part of your lifestyle, part of your story, you start to assign some level of your identity to that. You start to, take pride in being that type of person. It becomes a little bit easier for it to stick for the long run. It becomes a little more sustainable. And then, the results and the performance and all of that, of course it matters, but it's easier to optimize that stuff when it's actually part of your lifestyle rather than to, I don't know, try to come up with some perfect plan from the beginning.
Yeah, like three days a week running 3 days a week for a decade is a much more impressive accomplishment than running a marathon, but they don't give you a medal for one of them, right? So we sort of tend to go towards the clear and quantifiable, the competition or the group activity, as opposed to figuring out how to become the kind of person that does the thing consistently.
And the results of success are highly visible. We only talk about things like once the outcome happens. We talk about, oh, they ran the marathon in XYZ time. Or, you'll never see a news story that's like, man eats chicken and salad for lunch today. It's only a
Yeah,
story when it's like, man loses 150 pounds.
right.
And so the results of success are highly visible, and the process of success is kind of invisible and hidden from view. And so I just think because we live in such a results oriented culture and society, and that's what it gets talked about, it's easy to undervalue the lifestyle and the
Yeah.
process. And that's really the thing that you need to fall in love with. It's not, everybody wants the results. Like, who doesn't want good outcomes? But that's
Yeah.
not the thing. It's, do you love the lifestyle? Do you like living in that way each day? And if so, the results will naturally come.
So last question, because I think it pertains to that. And here we are sort of at the end of the year. How do you think about New Year's resolutions? If you had to give someone a better way of thinking about it than just starting on January 1st, I'm not drinking anymore. Starting on
Mhm.
January 1st, I'm taking a walk every day. What's a better way to frame this idea of resolutions? Because I do think seasons are important, and the idea of a new year and starting over, there is something psychologically important there,
Yeah.
but there's a reason most resolutions don't stick.
Well, there's actually some research around it that shows that, they call it, the research calls it the fresh start effect. But what they found is the beginning of a week, so Monday, the beginning of the month, first day of the month, or the beginning of the year, January 1st, they give you this feeling, the psychological feeling of a fresh start.
Yeah.
And that can be a good time to start something new. So, obviously one lesson there is you don't have to wait till January 1st. You could start the first of the next month, or the first of,
Yeah.
Monday of next week, or whatever. But I don't think there's anything wrong with using the natural energy of the season to get you going. So if that's motivating to you, great. Like, motivation rises and falls. So if you happen to have it, capitalize on it and go ahead and use it. But I think the tricky part is there's this standard for New Year's resolutions, this way we think about it, where we're like, oh, I'm going to, pick this thing and, whatever. But um, I would encourage you, rather than start by saying, what are the results I want this year? I mean, the most common New Year's resolution is do some form of exercise. So everybody sits there on December 27th and they think, I'd like to lose 40 pounds. So my resolution is going to be, I'm going to exercise, and, I'm going to go to the gym 4 days a week or whatever. And instead, I would encourage you to say, rather than starting by asking yourself, what do I wish to achieve? Let's start by asking, who do I wish to become? So who's the type of person that would not, that would go to the gym 4 days a week? Well, maybe it's the type of person that doesn't miss workouts. And this gives you can see how this gives you a different lens going into the year, rather than saying, I'm going to try to lose this amount of weight by this date and work out 4 days a week. Instead, you say, I'm going to try to be the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. And I'm going to try to foster that identity. And it doesn't matter if it's 2 minutes or if it's 20 minutes or if it's an hour, but I'm going to try to find a way to show up today and build, my little phrase is, every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become.
Mm-hmm.
So how can you cast a vote, even if it's a small one, for being that type of person? And I think if you have that lens for your New Year's resolutions, it gives you a different way of thinking about it for the next year.
No, I like that. And since we're talking on election day, it goes to the point. You don't have to win 100% of the votes in an election. That's not how it goes, right? It's often a very slim majority. It just has to be more than the other side. And so
it just has to be more often than not.
Yeah, exactly. Amazing, man. Well, this is awesome. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ryan.